What is up, guys? It is the Bluebloods here coming at y'all with another episode in our SEC in 30 days. We are joined by Georgia Bulldogs football insider for Dogs 247 Sports. Palmer Thombs is joining us today, and I just want to say I appreciate you taking some time to join the show, man.
Yeah, Zach, happy to be on and happy. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. So we got to start with last season before we get into all the news that we've had this year. Bulldogs finished 8-2, a big bowl win over Cincinnati and Atlanta to end the season off. There were a lot of obstacles, QB battles, injuries. The Bulldogs overcame all that to have a good year. But for you, did this season meet, exceed, or fall short of your preseason expectations for the Bulldogs?
You know, I think when you look back at last season, I think it's hard to say that they exceeded expectations. That I would definitely rule that out. They maybe met it, but I think they probably fell short because I think when you were looking at them preseason, and it depends when you were looking at them preseason, because is it pre-Jamie Newman opt-out or post-Jamie Newman opt-out? Because I think, you know, when you had him committed and you expected, hey, we've got this guy who is a dynamic quarterback, you know, all off season we spent, you know, time watching Wake Forest film and thinking about different ways that, you know, Georgia's new offensive coordinator Todd Monken could use him and these weapons and you know, his connection with Sage Surratt, the Wake Forest wide receiver. Well, you know, you put him around more talented guys than that, and you know, you add in running backs and offensive line. It was going to be an exciting time for Georgia with Jamie Newman at the helm, and so I think expectations were very high. I think, you know, you look at what their schedule was, you know, I think regardless of whether it was the pre-COVID schedule or post-COVID schedule, Alabama and Florida were going to be the two games. Obviously, the Crimson Tide going to Tuscaloosa early on in that season was always going to be a challenge, whether or not you had Jamie Newman, regardless of who you had. And then Florida was kind of the talk of the town in terms of, you know, hey, this is their year. They've got a returning quarterback in Kyle, you know, Trask. They've got a dynamic weapon in Kyle Pitts and several offensive guys around him. You know, they were bringing in transfers. And so there was a lot of excitement around that Florida program at the same time. And it was thought, you know, hey, this is the year that Dan Mullen could challenge Kirby Smart for the SEC East. And ultimately that's what ended up happening. So I think, you know, when you look at those two games, those were Georgia's two losable games on the schedule, and ultimately they did lose those, and it was because of, you know, the downfall that they had at the quarterback position. You know, shortcomings there. I don't know that you would have had those if you had Jamie Newman, but you know, ultimately hindsight is 20/20 vision, and you know, I think looking back on last season, Georgia was a much better team, a very improved team. Once you made JT Daniels the starting quarterback those last four games, but I don't know, you know, we will never know how healthy he was, you know, leading up to, you know, that point. We will never know what Jamie Newman would have been able to do. So I think, you know, COVID obviously caused everything to be weird, and you're right, last season off for Georgia is just a weird experience all around.
Right. And I mean, you kind of brought that up. We'll never know the whole JT Daniels story, but this is a lot of questions that we had on this podcast. I know a lot of non-Georgia fans had, especially after the whole Justin Fields transferring after not being able to start. Everyone's like, Kirby Smart can't pick the right quarterback. But then DeJuan Mathis comes out and struggles early. Stetson Bennett has a big Auburn game, but then struggles down the stretch. And JT Daniels never seemed to find the field early. Was the injury the main reason that Mathis and Bennett got first, I guess, dibs on the QB1 position? And, I mean, is there any other storylines about why Daniels didn't see the field earlier than 4 games left in the season?
Yeah, I would say it was the injury. You know, you look back at preseason practice, DeJuan Mathis was balling out. He was given, you know, Jamie Newman and JT Daniels a run for their money. And obviously Daniels being limited with, you know, being less than a year removed from his knee injury. I think it would have been a question to be able to put him out there, you know, week one. And also, you know, him not being around this offensive system for as long as those other guys had been around. I think DeJuan Mathis, you know, once once Jamie Newman opted out, Dwan Mathis seemed like the guy who, had put up, good performances in fall practice, and, that he was the next guy up. But, obviously he really struggled against Arkansas in that first half. And so, at that point you're looking at, okay, do we go to Stetson Bennett, who's been around the program for quite a long time, had a backup experience to Jake Fromm, knew Kirby Smart was comfortable with him. And that was the biggest factor that you end up going with him over JT Daniels, who, again, less than a year removed from a knee injury and full reconstruction, in his, I think you were a little bit concerned about what that injury situation was going to be like, or, you got to either Daniels or Carson Beck, who actually didn't make the trip to Arkansas, so he wouldn't have been an option, but he was a true freshman. And I don't think, that's not an ideal situation. Obviously last time Georgia had to turn to a true freshman after an injury, it worked out pretty well for them. But, I think that you had better options than Carson Beck and a banged up JT Daniels. So I think it probably was the injury. I don't think, we will ever hear Kirby Smart admit, the full truth there, whether it was injury. If it was injury, that's what he's going to keep having everyone believe. But if it wasn't, he will never admit to that. And so, I'm here to believe that it was injury. And also, once Stetson Bennett got in there, like you said, he had that great performance against Auburn, led a comeback against Tennessee, and didn't play that poorly against Alabama. So he had the Bulldogs up in the first half there. I think the first time that you really saw, a little bit of what Stetson Bennett's problems was in that second half of the Alabama game, where it felt like passes were getting tipped left and right. He was trying to do too much, and ultimately forced some throws that caused interceptions. Georgia goes on to lose that game. Next week they travel to Kentucky, and it was a low-scoring game. Georgia couldn't get much going in the passing game, so there were some problems there. But they were able to win that one 14-0. It was ugly, but it was again, it was a game where both teams were running the ball, so it felt like it was done in an hour and a half, 2 hours. Stetson Bennett gets a score on the ground, and then after a bye, you go down to Jacksonville and you play Florida. He had Georgia up 14-0. And he was playing really well. Threw a great touchdown pass to Marcus Rosemy-Jack-Saint, and then gets hurt on that play. Ultimately, wasn't able to come back at full strength, and so at that point, you come out of that game and you're left with, okay, what do we do here? Well, they were supposed to go to Missouri the week after that, and it looked like Daniels was going to be the starter there. With Bennett still banged up and not full strength, you were either looking at Dwan Mathis or JT Daniels. With the struggles that Mathis had early in the season, the struggles that he had against Florida in that second half, I felt like Daniels was the only option there, and ultimately that's who Kirby Smart would have gone with there. That game ends up getting postponed due to COVID. Just another weird thing about last season. So Georgia ended up having 2 weeks to have Daniels prepare for his debut against Mississippi State, where he came out in full force.
Yeah, I think the expectations for Daniels this year are really high. I have him top 3 in terms of returning quarterbacks this year. And I want to move more to like the transfer portal. Georgia has been the biggest winner on the transfer portal, and I think the history of the transfer portal. To land back-to-back 5 stars and Eric Gilbert and De'Aaron Kendrick within, I think it was 35 minutes. They landed back-to-back, and then you also get Brandon Turnage and Tyke Smith to help that secondary. How has Georgia found so much success in the portal, and how important are each of these transfers for the 2021 season?
Well, and it comes on the heels of bringing in a former 5-star in JT Daniels too. You want to talk about a guy that has the potential to turn around, kind of the narrative for a program. Georgia has struggled at the quarterback position. Hasn't really had a elite quarterback since Matthew Stafford. I think you can make a case for Aaron Murray, but, he was more of a game manager, and you can make a case for Jake Fromm, but again, more of a game manager, and he showed some of his flaws throughout his career. Daniels is another guy that Georgia has hit on from the transfer portal. But, I think looking at this year's guys, Tyke Smith is a huge one. Eric Gilbert and Darian Kendrick as well. Turnage, actually, so he is no longer on the roster at Georgia. I believe that he's entered the transfer portal again. There's not a ton of clarity there. Obviously, we haven't had a chance to speak with Kirby Smart about it. So there's some mixed rumors about where Turnage is at. But, in terms of just those other three guys, it was major positions that Georgia needed to hit on. You lose, 5 players in the secondary, 3 cornerbacks, really 4 cornerbacks. You lose 5 to the NFL draft in Tyson Campbell, Eric Stokes, DJ Daniel, Richard LeCount, Mark Webb. Those 5 were all drafted. Actually, Daniel was an undrafted free agent. But those 5 are moving on to play professionally. You lose Tyreek Stevenson to transfer, who ends up going to Miami. He was a guy that once you looked at, you were looking at Georgia's future of the cornerback position in that Peach Bowl win over Cincinnati. They had Stevenson, who had normally played at Star and was, that kind of hybrid safety corner linebacker type position. They moved him out to an outside cornerback position. And I think a lot of Georgia fans were really looking forward to seeing him develop into that role. You lose those guys, especially at that outside cornerback position. Georgia feels really good about what they've got at safety with Lewis Cine and Chris Smith returning. But you lose those guys at star and at the outside cornerback position. You really needed to hit on that. And entering spring practice, I would say that was Georgia's biggest concern. You had Keely Ringo, Amir Speed, and Jalen Kimber, kind of battling it out for those 2 positions. Well, now you bring in Kendrick, who should be a starter from day one. He's got the big game experience, former 5-star. Obviously, he was a wide receiver, but made the transition to corner. But, he could have been a early round draft pick had he decided to go pro. Ends up coming back, made the decision to come back to Clemson, and then ends up getting dismissed from their program. Georgia, that is a decision. The decision to take him in is one that has gone high up the ranks, and Georgia has cleared all the hurdles to get him in. If he's eligible to play in the fall, academically and everything, he will be a starter from day one, and which will be a great matchup to see him battling against his former teammates in week 1 against Clemson. And then Tyke Smith as well in the secondary. He's probably going to play that star position, but he gives you some, having him play star gives you some flexibility with those other positions where, a guy like Latavius Brinney, who started at star in that Peach Bowl, you can cross-train him at, star and safety to give you a little bit of help at safety because they lose Major Burns to the transfer portal there. You need to have the ability to play guys at multiple positions, and Tyke Smith, an All-American, shores up that star position and opens up the ability for Georgia to cross-train. Flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, where I mentioned that cornerback was probably Georgia's biggest concern coming into spring practice. I would say wide receiver was probably Georgia's biggest concern coming out of spring practice after you lose George Pickens to injury. You had other guys get banged up. You've got several guys that are coming back from injury, Dominic Blaylock and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint. They're both coming off of injuries that held them out of the end of last season. Blaylock missed the whole season with the torn ACL. He'll be coming back. Rosemy-Jacksaint is coming off of an ugly ankle injury. Hurt his lower leg ankle on that touchdown throw that I talked about earlier. His first career touchdown reception ends up being the end of his freshman season. But you've got those guys coming off of injury. You'll likely be missing George Pickens. It was interesting to see him. He was at Walter Camp preseason All-American, and that raised an eyebrow over here because I'm sitting here thinking, well, he's probably going to be out for the whole season. But Georgia fans have seen other programs, bring back players in that time period. 6 months. You look at Auburn has done it with couple guys, and Clemson did it a couple of years ago. Georgia's hoping that they can get him back. I would not count on it because I just think he's a guy that's got elite level talent to play at the next level, and might not want to risk further damage to that kind of injury that could hold him back at the professional level. So I don't think you will see him. So looking at that wide receiver room, you've got a lot of guys that have played, but not a ton of guys that have the same level of talent that George Pickens has. Well, enter Eric Gilbert, and you who played tight end at LSU, was recruited as a tight end, but with the evolution of the game of football and the way that the tight end position has moved out to the outside, rather than being a hand or of a on the edge guy, well, he's going to end up playing wide receiver for Georgia and has a really good chance to take over that role that George Pickens played in a big-bodied receiver that can go up and get some of those 50-50 balls. Going back to JT Daniels, he's a guy that was very comfortable throwing it up to Pickens, and I think losing him is a little bit of a concern. But when you can replace him with Eric Gilbert, some of those concerns could be solved pretty quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, the matchup nightmare that's going to be the Georgia offense with the run game, with JT Daniels' arms, with Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert is just, it's going to be that week one matchup is going to be insane. But I want to get to the main recruiting class. The 2021 cycle wrapped up back in February. The Bulldogs always top 4 class in the country, 4 5-star commitments. What were the biggest positional needs for Smart and this staff during this recruiting cycle, and who are the biggest instant impact guys that you see coming out of this class?
Yeah, I think you look at Georgia's recruiting class, and I'm pulling it up here just that I'm 100%. I think you look at the 2 guys that are the biggest signees in Marius Mims and Brock Vandegrift. I don't know that either one of them is going to play day one. Mims has a much chance than Vandegrift, because Georgia's going to be, looking around at the left tackle position. You could end up seeing Mims play there. He was the number 3 offensive tackle in the country, number 7 player overall. I think there's a chance, but I think you're more than likely not a true freshman at left tackle against Clemson defensive line. I think some of the players that have the biggest chance to make an impact would be Xavier Story and Smile London, 2 linebackers. Georgia has shown the ability to play some of those guys early on. They did so with Nakobe Dean, who had a role, and there's going to be spots to be in that linebacker room. You lose Monty Rice, the NFL. You lose Adam, or you've got Adam Anderson back, but you lose Jermaine Johnson. There, where there's some, sorry, or inside position, because there's some opportunities there. I think another guy that you're going to see, and actually going back to questions at corner. Nyland Green is a guy that made some noise early on. I don't know how much of an opportunity he's going to have anymore now that you add Kendrick. But Georgia has shown, a tendency to rotate their corners, and Nyland Green would certainly be among those that are in the rotation. He would be a top 5 corner for this team, maybe top 4. And, so there's a chance that you could see him play. Offensively, though, I think, a guy that really, maybe was not on everyone's radar coming out of the recruiting cycle, but coming out of spring practice certainly was A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell. He's a guy that is a big-bodied receiver, kind of played that same role that Pickens did after Pickens' injury, and he showed out in the spring scrimmage. If they named an MVP there, you probably would have given it to him. He had a big day, and I think that he's got a chance. Obviously the addition of Gilbert makes, that less of a need. But there is a good chance that Mitchell could be a factor in the wide receiver room. he showed that he's got some connection with JT Daniels. And, I think that there's a good chance that you could see him playing.
Right. And I mean, with Georgia, it's as deep as that team is, it's so hard to see the field as a true freshman. But being this deep, there's always new names for Georgia, Alabama, all these big programs that we see every year. Who do you have your eye on right now on the roster to have their breakout season for 2021?
Yeah, I would go Adam Anderson. You look at Georgia's outside linebacker success that they've had at the outside linebacker position. And he kind of goes hand in hand with Nolan Smith. Those two guys both could have a big breakout season. Just taking over the role that Azeez Ojulari and Jermaine Johnson played. They have the ability to get after the quarterback. And both of them have done it early on in their careers. Anderson going into his 4th year with the program and Smith his 3rd. But, I think because of the depth that Georgia has had in that room, those guys haven't had the same opportunities that some of those top-tier guys have had. And I think, Anderson is a guy who's been used in very unique roles. He's a little bit light for an outside linebacker, a true defensive edge rusher type guy. But so Georgia has used him in 3rd down situations more as an inside linebacker to get after the quarterback. When you want to take out an outside linebacker for a more traditional secondary player to cover some of the extra wide receivers on the field. I think Anderson has a chance to play that traditional outside linebacker role this year. And he's, like I said, he's shown a tendency to be able to get after the quarterback. I think that there's a good chance that he could have a big breakout season. He's been kind of highlighted as one of the players across the country that could do so. On the offensive side of the ball, it's always hard to circle one running back. I think, the guy with the biggest chance on offense would be Kendall Milton because, he's going into his 2nd year with the program. Georgia still has a ton of depth at that running back position, but Georgia has used that third, shown that they will use 2, 3, 4 running backs, with, having these guys and keeping them fresh and having their legs ready to go late in the season. It has paid off for Georgia. Looking back at that SEC championship run and the runs of the national championship, Tony Michel and Nick Chubb were the 2 headliners, but DeAndre Swift was making an impact too. Brian Harrion and Elijah Holyfield were making impact. So, even the year after that, you had Swift as kind of the headliner, and Holyfield was there, but Harrion was there as well. And same with, James Cook and Zamir White. Everyone has kind of, you look back at Georgia's running back room, everyone has kind of played their part and done their time as the 2nd, 3rd option before taking over that lead role. Well, now you're going to see Zamir White and James Cook in that lead role like they were last year. But I think you're also going to see guys like Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton. Milton is kind of the guy that I circled that has more of the ability to be a traditional running back and a catcher. So I really like him. He's a guy that I think fits, what you want in a running back. He's got every skill set that you could need and could be Georgia's best running back all around. I think he's got a good chance to break out as the running back, 3rd option at running back position.
Right. So, we've covered all the transfers. We covered the recruiting trail. We've covered breakout players. Looking ahead to the schedule, though, the Bulldogs are going to have tough points, but I think a majority of the schedule is winnable games that the Bulldogs should be pretty heavy favorites in. Opening weekend, that Clemson game in Charlotte is going to be the biggest game of the year. The always tough game against Florida. Then, you see the jerseys in the background. I hope the road trip to Jordan-Hare is tough, but odds are that's going to be a blowout. But you never know in Jordan-Hare. But for you right now, I know we're recording in June. What is the ceiling and/or floor for this 2021 Georgia Bulldogs team?
Man, the ceiling would be a national championship. I think that is safe to say. Georgia is going to be one of the most talented teams in the country. If you look at the 247 Sports blue chip ratio, that is kind of your line that you have to meet, criteria that you have to meet to be a national championship caliber team, and you've got to have over 50% 4 and 5 stars. Well, Georgia has the second most 4 and 5 stars, right behind Alabama. So I think the ceiling is absolutely a national championship. A lot of the ceiling and the floor is going to be determined after that week 1 matchup with Clemson, because I think the expectations for this team are going to change based on that. You win that game, and I think Georgia fans are immediately saying 12-0. You got to go 12-0 in this regular season, because if you can beat Clemson, you can beat everyone on that schedule. If you lose to Clemson, the expectation is then that you've got to finish 11-1 and run the table to make it to the SEC championship game, have that shot at likely Alabama out of the West. And so, I think that I wouldn't say that the floor is making the SEC championship game, because that is a really high floor. But I would say that, looking at the schedule, like you said, I don't see that many games that Georgia is not a touchdown plus favorite outside of that Clemson game. I would say, like you said, Florida game is always going to be an interesting one. Auburn has the tendency to get interesting, especially when it's on the road. Tennessee can be interesting on the road. But, with the way that the East is down, some programs rebuilding, first-year head coaches at South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Florida replacing so many weapons offensively. Kentucky could be a threat, but you get them at home. Missouri could be a threat, but you get them at home. Both those teams return plenty of talent from last year, and with Missouri, you return a quarterback, which is always a key. With the way that the East is down, and Georgia getting a favorable draw out of the West, taking Arkansas as their rotational opponent rather than getting Alabama like they have. Alabama, Texas A&M, and LSU, they've had those 3 in the last 3 seasons. I think that you've got to feel confident with where Georgia is at and how the schedule lines up for them. Like I said, the ceiling would definitely be a national championship caliber team. I would say Georgia is going to be my prediction out of the East. That's for sure. So I wouldn't necessarily – I don't want to say that the floor is the SEC championship game because that is a really high floor, but it's looking that way.
Right. So this is kind of just a follow-up before I get to my last question. We've heard these media figures, RJ Young, Josh Pate, really talk about how all the pressure is on Kirby Smart this year. If you can't win with this roster, how are you ever going to get over that hump? Is that the tone around Athens right now? Is that if Kirby Smart can't do it this year, then when is he ever going to get that national championship, get past Alabama in the SEC?
Yeah, I think that is kind of the sense around Athens, that this is the most talented team that he's had, the most favorable draw that he's had. If the stars are aligning for this year, where hey, if you can't get it done this year, I don't know when you can. I don't think he would. I don't think you would put him on the hot seat because of the success that he's had, early on in his head coaching career, and especially on the recruiting trail. But we are now 5-6 years into him being the head coach, and so he's no longer working with recruits that aren't his. He's with the success that he's had on the recruiting trail. He's got top 4 classes across the board. His roster's filled with 4 and 5 stars. Go back to that blue chip ratio. I think they were 80% 4 and 5 stars. So most talented team that he's had, most favorable schedule that he's had. I think that and I would also say that there's probably some pressure that he's putting on this team. That again, hey, we've got a favorable schedule. You don't want to say, hey, this is a winnable game, this is a losable game, but as a head coach, those things, and these players do too. I think that they probably feel the pressure. I think that they understand, hey, we've got a lot that's going for us this year, that's going right for us this year, and you've got to be able to capitalize on that when you do have those opportunities.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Right now, if I had to pick, I've said it on our show, right now, Georgia, in my opinion, should be preseason number 1 if we're basing it strictly off of this year. I think this is the best year for Georgia to make a run. But my last question here, I love asking this question because we're doing these themes so everyone in the country can get exposure to all these schools. I've luckily been to Athens numerous times. It's probably my second most gone to stadium, right behind Jordan Hare. And I've been at the highs of highs when I was there when Tennessee hit the Hail Mary, but I was also there when they upset Auburn as a top 10 team. So I've seen it go both ways. For those who haven't been, though, what makes Athens Sanford Stadium one of the best environments in college football?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and not one that you get too often on these podcasts. I think it's the combination of the city of Athens and the success that they've had with this football program in recent years. There's a great culture here in Athens, a lot of buy-in, and a lot of passion, for the program. I think it's something that makes those game days special. And I think everyone, from fans to players to media included, is looking forward to getting back to some sense of normalcy and seeing, 93,000 fill out Sanford Stadium rather than the COVID, limited capacity crowds that we've had. It was I think back, the game that sticks out the most to me, and it's the header image that you've got behind us. It would be that Notre Dame game, and it was an unbelievable atmosphere there that night. The combination of, a traditional program coming into town, squaring off with a program that has its fair share of history. And obviously the recent history hasn't gone Georgia's way as much as Georgia fans would like. That 1980 year sticks out and is going to be a weight on the program until they can get it done. But I think, with the success that Kirby Smart has had, there's a lot of energy around this program, maybe a sense of rejuvenated energy to an extent. I think it was waning in the years of Mark Richt, in the final years of Mark Richt. I think, you've got it to a point where there is so much excitement around the program. Again, Athens is an incredible college town. It really adds up for, a perfect combination for, Saturday night at Sanford Stadium. It is an unbelievable atmosphere.
It definitely is. And I tell people all the time, even as an Auburn fan, the loudest I ever heard that stadium was right before the Hail Mary when Easton hit that pass to put him up with I think it was 8 seconds left. And I was like, it was deafening. That I've been to Death Valley, Georgia. I've been to both Death Valleys. Georgia's the loudest stadium I've ever been to. So guys, get down to Athens to get to a game. But Palmer, man, I appreciate you joining me. This is your time, though. Shout out to where can they find you on social media? Where can they find the website or anything else you want to plug to the listeners?
Yeah, it's been a busy month over at Dogs 247, keeping up with recruiting coverage coming out of a 15-month-long dead period. So we've been busy over there. So you can find plenty of recruiting coverage as well as, excitement and hype for the preseason. We'll be getting into some of that in the month of July. As SEC Media Days and preseason practice rolls around before too long. So you can find all of our work over at Dogs 247, and you can find me on Twitter at Palmer Thombs.
Absolutely, guys. Go check them out. You actually can catch us both also on the Crowded Booth. You can go check out their YouTube channel too. Great podcast with Bryce Coons and them over there. But guys, as y'all know, we're coming back at y'all with another SEC in 30 days later this week. We're moving on to Alabama. So we had the two biggest SEC programs in 1 week. Shout out to Palmer for coming on the show. We'll definitely be reaching out and having him on more often as he gets closer to the season. But guys, for Palmer, myself, and the Blue Bloods, we are out.